Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of eXhuming the X-Files here on the Outpost Unknown YouTube channel. My name is Matthew. His name is Jeremy.
Hey!
And tonight, we are not who we are. Because we are talking about Ice, directed by David Nutter, who's probably most famous for directing 9 episodes of Game of Thrones. David Nutter is a very prolific television director. Written by Glenn Morgan and James Wong, 2 of the greatest X-Files writers. And this happens to be one of my personal favorite episodes of all time. Definitely in my top 3, Ice. Wow. Okay, so where do we go getting into this? Before I veer off into very excited territory, I will point out David Nutter, the guy who directed this episode. Also, this is the first episode he directed of this season. He goes on to direct 5 additional episodes after this, including Beyond the Sea and Tombs, which are the companion piece to Squeeze. So David Nutter is one of those guys, like you see him directing an X-Files episode, you're like, this is going to be quality. It's going to be quality. So, Ice. Set this one up, Jeremy. What is Ice all about?
So there's a team working on an ice core project, and then they go mad and just murder each other. So they bring in.
That's what I guess they go. We are not who we are. We are not who we are. Goes no further than this.
They bring in Mulder and Scully with a pilot, a couple of scientists. What was it? Like there was a pilot and 4 other people, Mulder and Scully?
Yeah, there's Mulder and Scully, the pilot Bear, and then there's the 2 kind of scientists and then the geologist.
Okay. And they find somebody. No, I can't remember now. But anyway, they go up there, they start investigating. You get some really great effects of shit climbing around underneath people's skin. There's all of this paranoia, like who's infected, who's not, who's the bad guy, who's not. It's a callback to the movie The Thing.
Yeah, John Carpenter's The Thing.
And that's kind of how it ends. Everybody's pregnant, and then.
So as I said, this is one of my top 3 of favorite X-Files episodes of all time. I am a gigantic fan of The Thing. I think you are as well. I have a board game that we play on occasion of The Thing, which is great fun and exciting.
Fantastic board game.
And the movie is perfect, in my opinion. It's a perfect film. There's nothing wrong with it. And what this episode does is sort of, the great thing about the John Carpenter film is that it really sets up paranoia and people not trusting each other, and that sort of tension that happens when, like, you know, you're the thing, like once a thing, always a thing, like are you the thing? And they do that perfectly here. So yeah, we get that opening prologue of these individuals. Well, first it's just one guy, and he's like, we are not who we are. He's recording himself, and then you just see this other guy grab him, and they start fighting, and then they shoot not each other, but they both commit suicide because they're pointing the guns at each other. And I'm watching this as a kid, and I'm like, what the hell is happening here? Like, what is going on? So this is one of the coolest prologues to an X-Files episode. It gets you hooked. It's like, what is going on? Why do these guys go nuts, and why are they shooting themselves in like a suicide pact here? And then when you finally get up there, what's cool about this is not an X-File. Mulder actually states, like, they were assigned this case. He's like, we got kind of shitty duty. We got to go up to the Arctic or Alaska or wherever they're at. He's like, we got told that we had to do this. When they go up there, they meet this great cast of supporting characters. So you actually have Felicity Huffman, who would later go on to be an Oscar-nominated actress. She plays this kind of, I don't know if she's the biologist. She's one of the 2 main scientists. And then you have Xander Berkeley, who, if you don't recognize Xander Berkeley, getting back to my previous comment of the T-1000, he's John Connor's foster dad who's drinking the milk that the T-1000 slams to his mouth. So if you remember Xander Berkeley, that's him. So he's here. He's playing this scientist who does not trust the feds at all. Like when they first meet him, he's like, can I see your ID? Like identification and stuff like that. So you got him. You got this other geologist fella who is kind of he played Kenny Banyan in Seinfeld. His name is Steve Heitner, if anyone knows who Steve Heitner is. So Kenny Banyan from Seinfeld's there. He's always listening to these old replays of San Diego Chargers games, or I think it was, or Dolphins or something like that. He's kind of like a little bit of comedic relief of this. And then you got this character of Bear, the pilot. Do you remember like the character of Bear and how he's sort of portrayed?
He was kind of a cross between the captain that had the gun initially in the Thing movie and that crazy rat catching dude.
Yeah.
You know who I'm talking about?
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. So we got a great cast of characters. They get there, and this episode just starts. Like they fly up there, they land. As soon as they open the door of this place, it is dark. It is low lighting. You got the flashlights out. They got a bunch of fog in the air, so you got those great beams that the flashlights hit as they reflect off all the particles in the thing. And it's clear, like there's dead people everywhere. They're dead everywhere. And then, like you said, it turns out we get all these great homages to the thing. Even in the opening prologue, there's a dog walking around. There's a dog alive, which we see come back into play later on. You get those steady cam tracking shots that John Carpenter does where, you just walk down a hallway, but it feels like you're gliding because the camera's not really bouncing up and down like someone walking, just kind of like slides down hallways and turns corners. So you don't know exactly like who's going to pop out and where they're going to pop out, or if somebody's going to pop out. Super, super cool stuff like that. And yeah, then the dog, of course, very thing like jumps on Mulder, attacks Mulder. They're trying to get the dog down. That's when they find like, yeah, there's something moving underneath the skin of this dog. And then the dog, of course, dies. He gets these weird black nodules on him. And then Bear, of course, is bit by the dog. And then he sees the black nodules on himself but tries to hide it. And you can just get that conspiracy, paranoia, like nobody trusts anybody sort of aesthetic through this entire episode. Were there any specific scenes that you remember? Because you mentioned before we started that you showed this one to your wife, correct? Was this the first X-Files episode she watched?
Yeah, the first full one that we sat down to watch, just so I could see if I could gauge her interest in it, because we came off of the Thing and she really enjoyed that. And yeah, I mean the paranoia, the acting, but mostly what I really remember about this episode and that I like the most was the practical effect of things crawling around or underneath people.
Yeah,
It was so gnarly.
it's
Looking at
gross.
like,
It's so
oh
gross,
god,
and the reactions of everybody when they see it really sells it. They're
yeah.
like, "Oh my god!" and they like pop back. It reminds me of that scene in Alien when the chestburster first comes out, and Ridley Scott's original Alien, and just the reactions you see of the actors around. They sell that. They sell that moment. Everyone remembers the chestburster coming out as the thing, but that kind of stuff doesn't work unless the cast can actually sell the effect, and that's what happened here. Just a sort of a funny aside, this whole sort of Arctic Alaskan research base or wherever they're at looks very similar to the thing because the production designer was Graham Murray, who worked on John Carpenter's The Thing. So not only do you have John Carpenter's, kind of set designer working it, but he actually got hired for this, and you could tell he was like, you know what, we're just going to make this look like the thing. We're just going to make it look like it, and it's so damn cool. I will point out the music. Mark Snow's music in this is super cool. It's creepy, much like the Ennio Morricone score from The Thing. It's very simple, right? Like the things like you hear dun 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 dun, kind of like that heartbeat sort of pace, and then just a few like very small strings and that kind of dun, 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 that kind of unsettles you. And the music in this is very similar, so it really sets the tone here. I like. Let me ask you about the scene with Mulder and Scully. There's a sequence in here where they're all kind of blaming each other, but this is the first time we see Mulder and Scully not really trust each other. So how did you feel about kind of getting that sort of flavor for the first time, where they're kind of yelling at each other, right? Where Mulder's like, it's one of them, and Scully's like, you're acting crazy because they find Mulder with a dead body, and so everyone's like, look, it's him, it's him, it's him. How did you feel about that dynamic that played out between Mulder and Scully in this episode?
Well, they had each other's backs early on because it was definitely a us versus the people that came here with us sort of thing going on. There's that distrust of the feds shit as well. I think it didn't even before they discovered that there was a parasite involved. Didn't a lot of those people think that the feds were just there to like shut them up or off them if
Yeah.
things had go like they were
Yes.
very very distrusting of Mulder and Scully.
Because they're like, well, you're here. Why is the federal government here? Because the whole idea is the other people that are in this party that were asked to go, they don't know why they're going. They haven't been told anything, and so when they look at the feds, Mulder and Scully, they're like, what is happening? Because even at the very beginning, the geologist is like, well, we should be able to figure it out. We got a geologist, a biologist, a chemical person, and then two federal agents. Like, what is going on here? And Xander Berkeley, who plays kind of like the main scientist guy that's up there, he doesn't trust anybody. Like, he just does not trust anybody. He makes everybody kind of turn on each other throughout the course of it. So, yeah, you're absolutely right. They don't trust anybody.
But when it comes down to whether Mulder and Scully trust each other, I think it kind of shows the character of Mulder a little bit that he just trusts implicitly his partner and he expects to be trusted
Yeah,
implicitly.
that's a great
Whereas
point.
Scully is, well, I mean, she was looking at the evidence that she had on hand. Something is screwing with all of these people and causing them to go crazy and kill each other. And if you are infected, I can't just turn my back on
Yeah. In Bear, that's the thing because they don't really know exactly what's going on until they see Bear gets infected. And what was what was funny is when Bear is like, because they want him to take a shit in a glass jar, and Bear's having none of it. He doesn't want to do it, and he's like, "I'm going to get on my plane. I'm going to fly out." The other cool thing about this, that's very thing-like, is that there's a giant snowstorm coming in, so they're trapped there at this point in time, unless Bear can fly them out. Bear dies because this parasite gets inside of his head and they try to pull it out, which is also a cool scene when they yank the weird worm out of his neck and he's just like convulsing on the table. Ugh, ugh. It's just,
you.
it's so gross and blood splattering all over the place. But they're stuck there. They're trapped with each other. And that's perfect. This is supposed to be a bottle episode. For those who don't know, a bottle episode is when they're trying to save money on a budget, so they create a single location and they keep everybody in that location, and there's nothing else. One very famous bottle episode of a show is the Chinese restaurant episode of Seinfeld, where they're just sitting essentially waiting at the Chinese restaurant. Has James Wong, of course, Lo Pan being in there. Shout out to that episode and Lo Pan. It's an excellent episode. But this is one of those things where it's like they're just trapped there. And I love the tension between Mulder and Scully because Mulder doesn't trust any of these other people. He doesn't trust any of them at all. And Scully at the beginning is at least trying to keep the peace a little bit, but then Mulder's not kind of adhering to kind of protocols because like he pulls out his gun on everybody and she pulls his gun on him and he's screaming at her and she's like, you may not be who you are and stuff like that. And he does that cryptic line where I guess they kind of lock him in the, is it a freezer? I mean, it's not a freezer. It's not cold in there, but it looks like a big freezer. They kind of lock him in there. And before she closes the door, because I remember as a kid when David Duchovny delivered this line, it scared me. It scared me. He's like, in here, I'll be safer than you will be out there. And I'm like, oh my God. You just see like the look on her face as she kind of locks the door. And there's that great moment when, after they've checked themselves, um, where Scully's alone in that room. And you could just see like how terrified she is, where she pulls the dresser and puts it in front of the door and like sort of like scrunches down in the corner like she's super super terrified. They just do a great job of making everything scary and ominous in this. How'd you feel about the tone of this episode?
I can't believe that they saved that much money on a bottle episode here, because I think from the onset of people shooting each other, plus all of the gore and practical effects throughout the rest of it, like that had
Yeah,
to be fairly costly.
yeah, yeah.
Because
That
it was the go ahead.
Well, that's the spoiler. It was supposed to be a bottle episode, but it went way over budget. So they actually like lost money on this episode because it cost so much. That was the thing I was going to point out. But yeah, you're right. I mean, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead and continue.
But as far as the tone, like everything came together, and there was nobody in that cast. It was a fairly small, group of people, but nobody phoned it in. There was nobody that was overdoing it or underdoing it. I guess they just told, it was like, hey, have you all watched the thing? Yeah, we're doing that, and take it seriously, and they did.
Yeah, for sure. And there's all kinds of like little moments in this that are really good. Um, there, Mulder always gets a moment to shine with this comedy. There's a sequence early on when they all kind of want to just fly away, or some of them do, and they kind of put it up to a vote. And they're like, well, we got to check ourselves first, because once they know there's some kind of weird parasite that came out of the ice, because what all these guys were doing was they were drilling down into the ice. They broke a record. They went down so far, and we find out that this research facility is on top of a meteor crater or something. A meteor hit the planet 50,000 years ago or something, and they drilled down so far that they found this ammonia-based life form. Of course, they didn't realize it was an ammonia-based life form, and once it gets inside you, it kind of drives you nuts. I don't know how would you call like what happens? They just go like kind of like a rage virus, a zombie sort of thing, or they just get really mad, right?
Yeah, rage for virus is kind of a good descriptor, but they never really absolutely lose control and just become completely mindless. They get very angry. They get very, very violent.
Yeah. And I think like a part of the implication is like it'll get worse the longer it goes on. And we find out that the dudes at the very beginning of the prologue killed themselves to try to prevent this thing from spreading any further. Because if it's just like the thing, if one of these things gets out, it could potentially spread to the population. And even Scully mentions what would happen. Again, very similar to the thing. There's all kinds of stuff like that in there. So yeah, I mean, I fucking love this episode. I think it's fantastic. There's that moment where they're checking themselves and like, oh, we got to check. Everyone's got to check themselves. And Mulder has that great line, before anyone passes judgment, we are in the Arctic, sort of thing, which is great. I'm curious. Like, I like to put us in this situation. You and I are up there. We find ourselves in this situation. How are we handling this? Are we sort of are we going to devolve into kind of like what Mulder and Scully did here, where they don't trust each other, or are we like, yeah, we got to focus on these other people because it's definitely something else that's stirring the pot here, not us.
I think in the beginning we'd probably band together, but as time progressed, we'd both end up like Bear, just different versions of him. Where I think you would grab the gun and exact control, and I would just be the chaotic person who would just run out to the cockpit and then like off myself and just cover the plane in blood. So it'd be fly away.
Very good. Yes, um, I do think that what's cool, like ultimately how they resolve this is they find out that two parasites in the same host kill each other, and so they have this there's a whole domino chain effect or whatever. But the coolest thing in here is when Scully realizes the solution, and so then she opens up the door to go tell Mulder, is like, look, we can fix this. We just got to introduce a worm into you. And Mulder's like, what the fuck? He's like, you put the worm in me, you're gonna infect me. What are you talking about? And they have that whole thing where they kind of like have to check each other and stuff like that. And you get that Mark Snow music where it's like, could possibly one of these individuals be infected? And then they have that whole fight where they're trying to put the worm in Mulder's ear as he's screaming no. I'm sitting here thinking like, this is fucking great. everything about this is just beautiful and wonderful. And then it turns out that Felicity Huffman, as she's holding Mulder down, Xander Berkeley, John Connor's foster dad, sees that the worm crawls underneath her neck, and he freaks out. And they eventually put the worm in her to eliminate it. And then, of course, what happens? The military firebombs the entire place so that Mulder can't go back and get any more evidence. And Xander Berkeley has that great line. Is like, well, you should have known that. They're your people, so to speak. And and the cool thing about Scully in this also, and I know I'm very animated, but I love talking about this episode because it excites me greatly. Scully is like, fucking kill this thing. Like, don't bring this out. And Mulder's the one's like, we got to study this. We got to get samples and all this stuff, which is kind of like a reverse from some of the other stuff that we've kind of seen from Scully, who's been very scientific and thinks that, we should, analyze things. But this one, she's like, no, burn it, destroy it, get rid of it immediately. Even though Mulder's like, this is alien life. This is literally proof of alien life. It might have come from a meteor 20,000 years ago, but we could study an ammonia-based life form and how we would deal with it if one ever came down to attack us or something like that, which was very, very cool. A few other moments that I just kind of mentioned on my notes here. This was not an actual X-file. Like I mentioned, Mulder, they were assigned the case, which I thought was kind of cool to get away from sort of that. We got that in the last episode where Mulder was kind of asked to be on board. But this one was cool where we see the FBI is actually assigning them cases. So they do kind of have to do something other than what they are doing. I still think the video that they watch of the guy in the prologue, where you just kind of get half of his face and you get all that sort of artifacting. And he's like, we are not who we are. Awesome. Still creeps me out to this day. Let's see. Bear was awesome. Loved the bear. Worm under the skin gives me the creeping willies. Can't handle it. See, that's pretty much it. Those are my thoughts on the episode that I had down here. Is there anything else from this episode that stuck out to you that you want to discuss?
Not really. Like I really like the effects. Even when they were viewing the worms attacking each other, that could have been really, really poorly done. And I thought, for the time at least, it was really, really cool to watch. But mostly, it's just how do you pull off that? I've always wanted to see that done. Is pulling off the worm crawling underneath somebody's back. So just, so gross.
It's so gross. It's real gross. And that's what's so powerful about this episode. It's so impactful even to this day. Like, it holds up. Pretty much. I mean, some of the CG worms when they're kind of doing, you can tell, all right, that's 1993 sort of CG work, but it's okay. You accept it because the premise is so good and the acting is so good and the tension and the atmosphere is so good that you're just kind of like, I believe this. I'm 100% on board. And this is the one that Fox should have advertised as, don't watch it alone, not Ghost in the Machine. I mean, give me a break. That wasn't scary at all, or Shadows or whatever it was. This is the one that I thought was really, really scary and terrifying. It was probably the first X-Files episode I watched as a kid that I was like, I am fully 1,000% on board with this show. Like, I will be from this point forward a devotee of the X-Files. Yes, I love some of the earlier episodes, but this was the one that really captured my imagination as a kid. I love those things where people are trapped in a small area and they got to try to figure out what's going on. And this just hit me in the sweet spot. So with that, I guess I'll ask, your wife watched it. Is she now a fan of X-Files then? Was she wowed by it?
Her and the kids are sitting down watching episodes with me every Friday when I sit down and watch them.
Excellent, cool. See, they're still making fans to this day. So excellent job, X-Files. So with that, that's about all I got for this episode of this week. Next week, we are going to be, I'll spoil this a little bit, one of my least favorite episodes. So we go from, I go through this high where I hated Ghost in the Machine. I didn't like it at all. Then I go to one of my favorite episodes of all time. Then I go back down to one of the ones that I think is one of the worst episodes of X-Files ever, which is Space. So I'm on a wild roller coaster. Maybe I'll change my mind if I rewatch it, but I remember hating next week's episode, Space. But we'll see. We'll see. So check back next Friday. Be sure to hit that like and subscribe if you want to get all that cool stuff from us, and we will see you next week. Adios.